today's video is going to be, yet again, my favorite video to film every month, and that is my September reading wrap-up. We're in October now, but I'm going to tell you guys all the books that I read in September, obviously. So I read 17 books in the month of September, and I want to give you guys just a quick recap on how many physical books I read and how many books I read on Kindle and how many books I listened to. I only ended up finishing one audiobook, but I ended up finishing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I ended up finishing 11 physical books, 4 Kindle reads, right? Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 physical books. 12 physical books, 4 Kindle reads, and 1 audiobook. So I started using my Kindle more this month because there was actually 2 books that were, one of them was not on my TBR for the month, but I read it on Kindle because it was available on Kindle Unlimited, and it was also a new release that I really wanted to read, and also another one of them was on my TBR, and 2 of the other ones were not on my TBR, but I read them because they are super hyped and popular now, and they're like such perfect atmospheric fall reads. So we're going to start off with all the books I read in the beginning of the month, obviously. And I did finish 1 audiobook. So let's get into it. I did actually end up returning all of the physical new releases that I bought because I didn't feel like I needed to keep them. And I'm actually going to be returning the other new release that I tell you guys about as well. I think out of all the new releases that came out, I think I enjoyed 2 of them, but the other 3 weren't really that great. Actually, I think I enjoyed 3 of them. 2 of them were not really hitting. So let's start off with the first book that I read in the month of September. But I had a really good reading month, and I actually got to quite a bit of books that I was happy that I got to this month. There was a lot that was on my TBR for a while, or actually books that were on a lot of the people I watch TBRs. They put most of these books on their TBR for September as well, but I was fully intending on reading these in September before people said that they were putting these books on their TBR. So I guess like as I get more into reading, maybe I'm getting more into like what books that I want to read at the start of a season. Like since it's the fall now, I feel like these books were just really perfect for fall. So anyway, the first book I read this month was The Wishing Game by Meg Schaffer. I think I gave this a 3.75 out of 5 stars. I thought that this was really, really cute. But there were some things that I had an issue with, but I did enjoy that book a lot more than I did The Lost Story. The Lost Story fell a little bit flat for me. I actually already unhauled that book. I don't actually own it anymore, and I don't know if I'm going to own this one either. I might just start donating books to the library. So anyway, so this is about a woman named Lucy Hart, and she needs to take care of this kid. What is his name? Christopher, right? Yeah, Christopher. And basically, Christopher needs to be adopted. He's been an orphan for like a long time, and Lucy is basically like his teacher. And Lucy really wants to adopt him. And they're like obsessed with this book series written by this huge like children's author. But he hasn't written a book in like 10 years or so. Like everybody thinks that he's retired, that he doesn't want to write anymore, and basically like he lives as like a recluse, and he kind of like dropped off the face of the earth. So everybody's like, what the hell happened to him? So all of a sudden, sorry, my friend just texted me. So he decides that he wants to write a new book, but there's only one copy in existence, and he holds like this competition for like people to try and win this copy of this book. Like he selects like a few contestants in order to win this copy. So, but if he doesn't have a winner, then the publishers will buy it and then release it to the public. So then like everyone can read it pretty much. But he's like, that's not like what I intended and blah, blah, blah. And basically it gave me like a lot of, Willy Wonka vibes with like the golden ticket in order to be able to enter the chocolate factory. And I think she said that she was inspired by Willy Wonka for this book. And she kind of like makes comparisons to a lot of like classic books. So hold on a second. So anyway, it was an enjoyable read, but there was like I did enjoy this more than The Lost Story because I felt like she wasn't trying to make it like a classic book, because like even though she's like inspired by these classics, like The Lost Story was inspired by Narnia, they're not going to be really like classic books like modern classics today, like Game of Thrones or like Mistborn, like stuff like that. She doesn't really have that certain like fairy tale aspect of her writing, really doesn't like hit that way as, you know, like Narnia would or like Willy Wonka. But I do think that this was better written and I did enjoy this one quite a bit. There's just like some things that she like says in the book sometimes that are like completely out of nowhere. Like, you know, certain dialogue that I'm like, why the hell is this being mentioned? It's like some stuff that's like a little bit inappropriate that I'm like, again, who are her books made for? Are they supposed to be YA? Are they supposed to be a little bit more mature? Are they supposed to appeal to like a wider audience? That's like the only thing that throws me off, because it like kind of takes me out of the story a little bit and I'm like pulling back and I'm like, what? So, but overall, I thought this one was really fun. I gave it a 3.75, so I'm glad that I started the month off with that one. And also, again, a lot of people were putting that book on their TBR for September, so okay, then the next book that I read was Primetime Romance by Kate Robb. I don't own this anymore because I did return it like a week after. And for those of you that are not familiar with Kate Robb, she wrote the romance book called This Spells Love. This is only her second book. And I read that book all the way back in March, and I actually found out about that book. Actually, it was February. I found out about that book from Batty Bean. She like absolutely raved about it in her reading wrap up, that I ended up reading it like right after I finished ACOTAR because like I really needed a palate cleanser, and I loved that book. So I had really high hopes for this book, but I ended up giving it only a 3.25 out of 5 stars. So basically this book is about, what is her name? I forget the main character's name. Bryn. Her name is Bryn, and she lives with this guy named Josh. Like basically they're roommates. But Bryn is like obsessed with like this TV show that she can't ever stop watching, and she loves watching it because it's like basically her only comfort after she got recently divorced. And one night when like Bryn and Josh are walking home, because Josh is a bartender at a club, and Bryn has to get in like her friends for this bachelorette party, to go partying there. So she gets in and she sees Josh there working, and he's like, "Let me walk you home. It's been pretty dangerous lately." So he walks her home, and this night just so happens to be her birthday, but she doesn't celebrate it because she thinks like everybody would forget, and like the only person that remembered was like her mom. And she doesn't like celebrate it. So he walks her home, and she wants to just go home and watch her show. And all of a sudden, this like guy shows up at the door, and they're like, "What the hell? Why is somebody knocking at the door at like midnight?" Because it was like midnight that day. And also Josh didn't know that it was her birthday, and he's like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was your birthday." And this guy like comes in bringing in like this birthday cake for her to make a wish on. And Josh like sits next to her to watch the show that she's gonna watch. He's like, "What are we watching?" And it was actually pretty funny. And she's like, "Well, I was gonna watch this." I forget what the show is called. It doesn't really matter. It's basically like a Dawson's Creek is how she describes it. And honestly, I was really enjoying like the first like 25% of this book. I thought it was hilarious. But then she makes this wish, and then all of a sudden they are sucked into this TV show, like her and Josh. And then, because this TV show was actually all of a sudden like canceled out of the blue, and it never actually truly had an ending. So after they get sucked into the show, basically they have to give the show like a proper ending in order to be able to go back home. But there's like the guy that was the one that wanted to give her her birthday wish is actually in the show. He's actually like this extra that has been on every single episode. And it's so funny because he's kind of like fan service for people that are avid watchers of this show. And he like tells her the only way you can go home is if you give me my proper ending. But it starts to get like really creepy with him. And honestly, I kind of agreed with all the reviews of this book because I kind of didn't feel like absolutely any chemistry between Josh and Bryn. It just was kind of non-existent. And then the romance kind of happened out of nowhere. She's like, "Oh, I like him. Oh, I love you." And then like all of a sudden, they didn't start kissing until maybe like 200 pages in. And this book was only like, I think like 315 pages long. And honestly, with some of the new romances coming out, I feel like they just take way too long to get to the romance. And we will get to that, believe me, with the other two new release romances that I read this month. Because it will be shocking, the one I actually liked the most. But anyway, he like keeps on threatening her, like this extra guy, if you don't like be with this guy on the show, because they have to play characters in the show in order for it to give it its proper ending. He's like, "You need to be with this guy or you're never going to go home." And that was basically it. There really wasn't anything else to it. It kind of reminded me of Pleasantville. But also it had a lot of similarities to A Novel Love Story by Ashley Poston, where, you know, the characters were stuck in her favorite book series. But I thought that book was better written, and I know some people have their gripes about that book, but I personally really enjoyed it. This one kind of fell flat for me because, again, I felt like there wasn't really any chemistry between the two characters. So I really did not like this one as much as I liked This Spells Love. I thought that one was much better written. So unfortunately, that one wasn't really a hit for me, but it was okay. Okay, the next up was another new release, and I read Matt Haig's new release called The Life Impossible. And if you guys know, I absolutely love Matt Haig's writing. I feel like he is not talked about enough, because I feel like people only read Midnight Library from him, and that's it, when I actually think a lot of his other books are just as good. I love Midnight Library, but the fact that is his biggest book is crazy. Like, it's still an amazing book, but it's like, it's so funny, like, when people only read, like, the hit book by that author and then none of the other books, but I do think his books are great. So anyway, this book is about a old woman named, what is her name? I don't know if she has a name in this, actually. Oh, her name is Grace. Sorry. And basically, Grace has lost, like, everybody important in her life. She had a husband, she had a child, but something tragic happens to her child, and then shortly after, her husband passes away. So basically, she's a widow. But she gets, like, this letter randomly from this woman that she's only ever met, like, once in her life, who is basically inviting her to live in, I think it's Ibiza. Correct me if I'm wrong. And she wants her to, like, leave all of her comforts to come live there and, like, live her life. Because honestly, Grace thinks that mostly, you know, she's been living a pretty boring life, but she also thinks she doesn't deserve anything better because she blames herself for what happened to her child. So all of a sudden she decides to go live there after, like, trying to convince herself she shouldn't, but she ends up going. And, you know, it ends up, like, changing her life. But also, she does not understand why this woman left her like, house in Ibiza. Because she's like, again, I've never even really known this person. She never really got to know me when she was alive. Because she leaves her this letter when she's assumed to be dead. So after she moves to the town, you know, things start happening that she can't really explain. And then all of a sudden, she discovers that she has these certain abilities and, like, powers. And it was kind of cool. It was pretty good. I really, really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4.25 out of 5 stars. It probably wasn't my favorite book from Matt Haig, but I just love his writing. But I felt like some things were a little bit too over-explained about, like, how much... Like, of course, we need to enjoy life and live every experience to the fullest and, like, really be present in the things that we're doing. And I totally understand that concept, of course. But sometimes he would flesh out things that were a little bit too unnecessary. But also, I feel like when he writes, he doesn't waste, like, a single word. But sometimes it's a little bit much, even though the chapters are, like, super short. Sometimes I wish they were a little bit more, like, concise, but I still really enjoyed it. So, and then she befriends this man that was actually this woman's lover. And he starts, like, helping her out with her abilities, but also he like, warned her that there's also, like, a great evil that they end up having to, defeat. And that's basically it. That's, like, the main concept of what the book is about. Concept, if I could speak. But I ended up returning that too, because I was like, I don't really need to keep it. So, yeah, unfortunately, I didn't keep it. But at the same time, I'd rather return books that I don't really want to keep, and then I can get my money back and just still work on the books that I own and work on my physical TBR. So... Okay, let me go wipe my under eyes, and then we'll talk about the next book. Okay, so next up, I read a book that I was hoping to get to in August, but I ended up reading it pretty early in September, and that is Mahari McFarlane's Just Last Night. Again, a lot of people actually put this on their TBR for September, so I ended up reading it as well, but again, I was planning to already read it in September because this was already on my August TBR. I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This was brilliantly written. So it's based around 4 characters, which is Eve, Justin, Susie, and Ed. And Eve is the main character. And I just want to say before I talk about this book, I loved Evie as a main character. I really liked her. So basically, Eve is in love with Justin, right? Or is it Ed? No, she's in love with Ed. It literally says it on the back of the book, so it's not a spoiler at all. and something tragic like happens one night, and it just like turns their lives upside down. And I honestly really can't say much else about this book because it's going to pretty much spoil everything about this. But that's basically what it's about. They all have like this trivia night that they go to, and that's the way that they come together to like do things together, obviously. And they also said like they were never going to have like romance involved because then they didn't want to like ruin their friendships. But Eve can't help her feelings for Ed. Oh, and then like, you know, their summers end and they have to go off to college, and Ed ends up like writing her this letter about how much he's in love with her as well. So then they want to try this, but at the same time like it's long distance because both of them have to go to college. And then all of a sudden, oh my God. Then Eve finds out that Ed has another love interest. And she doesn't even find out about this until she like sees him again on like this trip that they have. And then something tragic happens after this. And it basically like kind of flips the whole story on its head because in the first like 100 pages of this book, I was laughing my ass off. This was so freaking funny. There was some times where I just had to put the book down because I literally could not stop laughing. Like her one-liners are hysterical. But then like after something tragic happens, it was almost too much about it. I'm not saying that, you know, you couldn't have concentrated on this for a while, but I felt like in the middle of the book where she has to go like away with another certain relative that she ends up falling for because she finds that, you know, her romance with Ed is never going to happen, and she basically like gives up on him so she can pursue somebody else. That's not really spoiling anything. So, but I felt like it kind of like concentrated a little bit too long on the tragedy that happened and not enough on the romance is what I'm saying, because this is actually in the romance section of Barnes and Noble. It's supposed to be a romance. So I was like, when are they going to like, but I actually felt more romance in this than I did like most of the other romances that I read this month that were new releases. Cause like it went deeper than just like, you know, showing a affection towards somebody. It was like, you know, loving every part of someone, like being their friend and everything. But I still felt like it took a little bit too long. But I still really enjoyed this book. It was just so beautifully written. And basically, like, just last night means everything can change in, like, one night. It's not, like, about, like, just last night being, like, just their last night of having, like, a romance or, like, something happening. Like, basically a bunch of things happened in, like, one night. That night that this happened. So that's why it's called that, and I really love that. And I just want to read this one quote to you guys that I absolutely adored in this book. It says, "Beauty isn't an arrangement of feelings, even features as perfect as Finley hearts. It's a feeling. This is how it feels in the split second." I don't know if his name is Finley. Didn't I take that out of there? Never mind. It's fine. It's not really spoiling anything. This is how it feels in the split second you suddenly become aware that you're falling in love with someone. The click of a jigsaw's last piece, the rainfall of coins in a jackpot slot machine, the right song striking up on your being, and you being swept away by its opening bars. That conviction of making complete sense of the universe in one moment. Of course, you're where I should be. You're here. I just loved that so much. That quote resonated with me so much. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. There was like one part of it that really made me cry though. Like I literally had to put the book down and I was crying for a good like 10 minutes. Because it really reminded me of my best friend. in a way that she passed away. Like, she passed away so suddenly as well. So, yeah, that was pretty sad. But other than that, I really did enjoy this book. Okay, then the next book that I read was Lovely War by Julie Berry. And everyone was talking about this book. So I was like, let me finally actually read this. And this was my first 5-star this month. I absolutely freaking adored this book. This book is like one of the most unique, beautiful concepts that I've ever read in my life. Like, I've never read anything quite like this book. This was also technically my first historical fiction. But this is also a YA book. And I was just so blown away by how mature this book is, but also it does appeal to like a wide range and of different people and different ages. And I think that's what Wishing Game is lacking, is that this is it. Like, this is just so beautifully written. I could not get over how much I freaking loved this book. So it is based around 4 different characters during World War I. And their names are Hazel, James, Aubrey, and what was the last one? Colette. And basically it's about their romances with each other, with Colette and Aubrey and Hazel and James during World War I. And oh my God, the way that this is written is so freaking beautiful. I cannot get over it. Like, it mixed, like, the tragedies of the war with their romance, like, so beautifully. And basically, this book is kind of like a multi-genre book, because it's historical fiction, fantasy, and romance. And I was like, how is this going to balance out? But I highly suggest, if you were thinking about reading this book, listen to the audiobook. The audiobook was absolutely wonderful, because it had 4 different voices for all of the characters. And they were all told by Greek gods. Like, this whole story was told by 4 Greek gods, which was Aphrodite, Ares, Hades, and Apollo. And basically, Aphrodite is like pleading her case to Hephaestus. Because if you guys know anything about Greek mythology or Roman mythology, Aphrodite could never really like settle down with anyone, even though she was the god of love and beauty. Her curse was basically not being ever to really love anyone, because she's always creating love for other people. So she obviously creates the love between Hazel and between James, but it's just so beautifully written, and there's so many issues in this book that they balance absolutely beautifully. So like, the whole story is pretty much narrated by Aphrodite, most of it, and Hades and Ares, and a little bit of Apollo, and it was just so beautifully written. I absolutely loved this. If you take any recommendation from this video, read this book. I cannot believe how unique this was, and I knew I was going to love this book from the moment I started reading it, and I just enjoyed every minute of it. I really don't want to talk about anything else. That's like the gist of it, because like, I don't want to spoil it. I loved it. I loved it so much. Oh, and also in the audiobook, she like writes like the sections of this book as like acts and basically like she ties a lot of music in, like, because Aubrey's actually a musician and Hazel is a amazing pianist. So when you listened to the audiobook and Hazel starts playing the piano, they play the piano in the audiobook. And if like Aubrey's having like a rehearsal or a performance, they'll play those instruments. So that's why I loved the audiobook so much. Oh, it was so good. And basically, James is a soldier in the war, and he has to leave Hazel for a certain amount of time. And Aubrey is a musician for like the troops and like the captains. And he's also black. So, you know, obviously he's dealing with racism during that whole time. So it was in 1917. So it was just so beautifully written. I absolutely loved it. Okay, and then the next book, this was actually my best reading week for quite a while because I found 3 5-stars in this week. So the next book that I read was my book of the month from August. So I was able to read it in September, if I could speak. It was a little bit warmer this weekend, so that's why I wanted to read something that was like by the water and like by a beach, and that is The Wedding People by Alison Espach. I gave this book a 5 stars as well. I absolutely loved this. This was actually my first dark comedy that I've ever read. And let me just see what her name was. Phoebe. So her name is Phoebe, and Phoebe arrives at this hotel. And she's actually not part of this wedding that is going on at this hotel. She basically comes there because she thinks that her life is pretty much over, and basically she just wants to unalive herself. But she was like, if I want to do that, I don't want to do it in my house. I want to go somewhere that's beautiful and, you know, try and spend some time, like, you know, doing things that I enjoy. And also, she was recently divorced as well, but she also thinks that she doesn't have anything else to live for because she just, like, was never really good enough. She also, you know, she still loves her husband, but also they're, like, not together anymore. So she basically gave up on that. But throughout the book, it's just basically having her encounters with different wedding guests in the wedding. And it was just so freaking brilliantly written. I loved this so much. It was hysterical. It was serious. It was just had a great way of balancing the seriousness and the funniness and the comedy. I mean, so well. And I just love her writing so much. I cannot wait to read her next release. And basically, like, the bride of this wedding finds out why she's really there because she ends up, like, going to her room. I forget why. What? Why does my brother's friend ask me to go to the gym? That is freaking weird. I have been so annoyed lately. Like, I actually went from, like, no plans to, like, too many plans. So I'm actually going to meet my boyfriend soon. So I don't know. Now, like, everybody wants me to do something, but that always happens in October for me. I always end up having, like, a gajillion plans. So anyway, I freaking loved it. And also, like, the bride ends up finding out, like, why she's at the wedding. Because she's like, why are you here? You're not invited to the wedding. And also, the hotel was supposed to be closed to other guests except for the wedding guests. Because she has, like, a ridiculous amount of money, this woman, from her father. That, like, basically she could close the whole hotel for her wedding. And it was just brilliant. I loved it so much. It's just such a good book. Okay, and then the next book that I read was I finished my audiobook, and that was Chloe Walsh's Taming Seven, and this is book 5 in Boys of Tommen. And now I am actually all caught up with Boys of Tommen, even though I haven't been reading quite as many, like, physical series in the past couple of months. I still completed a series by listening to it. And I absolutely adore this series. It's one of my all-time favorites, probably in my top 5 at this point. I probably love this series more than Magnolia Parks because I've actually given every single book in this series 5 stars. And I actually haven't done that with any other series. I don't know what it is, but it's just the way that Chloe Walsh gets you to fall in love with her characters. I literally have not really experienced that besides Feyre and Rizan in ACOTAR and Magnolia and BJ in Magnolia Parks. They are probably the characters that I literally will die for. Like, but to have, like, the entire cast of characters resonate with so many people. And the fact that I love every single character in this book is really hard to. Well, there's like one character in this book that's kind of like really hard to like. But anyway, Taming Seven is basically Gipsy's book. And if you guys don't know, Gipsy is like the best character of all time. Like, I don't care what anybody says. I absolutely adore him. He is hysterical in the Boys of Tommen books. But now you find out exactly why he is so funny is because a lot of people use humor to cope with trauma. And it's like, okay, like obviously he had some really dark things going on. And it's basically about his romance between her and him and Claire, because we all knew that he was with Claire. Like, if you have been reading this series throughout, you pretty much know he's with Claire by like the first book, so it's not really a spoiler. And basically it's just the events of him and Claire's romance. They kind of remind me a little bit of Magnolia and BJ because they sleep in each other's bed every night, but like they all have like their own problems to deal with because they're not really together. They just have to be near each other. Like, they just sleep in the bed. They're not like sleeping together. They're not like hooking up. It's just like if Gipsy doesn't sleep near Claire, he has like serious issues like sleeping because he'll just have constant nightmares. But when you actually find out what Gipsy's trauma is, it's crazy because it's like even deeper than what I initially thought. And at first, I'm not going to give anything else away because I really can't because it's the 5th book in the series. But I just love the way that, again, Chloe Walsh writes romance and the problems that they are going through. She just balances them absolutely brilliantly because the romance, you never, like, lose the core of the story, which is always the romance. And she just has an amazing way of balancing the trauma that they go through and all the real issues that they go through as teenagers. This one was almost a little bit too extreme though, but then when I was thinking about it and after I finished it, I was going to give it a 4.75, and I'm like, who am I kidding? I'm giving it a 5-star because I just love these characters way too much, and call me biased, but I could not get over how good these books are. And yes, this book is shorter, but I kind of almost appreciated that. But also she like writes the events. Oh, yeah, I thought that was for my brother. I was like, why is he texting me that? She writes the events in succession in tandem of certain events going on in the first 4 books. And she does that throughout the entire series, and she writes them so brilliantly because they're always from a different kind of perspective. But it's different from like Daisy Hates and Magnolia Parks because Daisy Hates is just a complete repeat of the same dialogue. But she does it in a way where it's a completely different situation, and I just love the way she writes. I need to start talking about a couple more books or I'm never going to get done. Okay, then the next book that I read was a new release, and that is The Games Gods Play by Abigail Owen. And this was the first book that I read on my Kindle. And I gave this book a 4 stars. And basically, this is about, what is her name? Why doesn't it say her name? I can never remember the names of half of these characters. And then in the synopsis, this one's actually like kind of super vague. But basically it's about this girl that has to perform these trials for the gods. Humans are selected to perform for the trials of the gods. And it says basically Percy Jackson meets the Hunger Games. And she is going to be Hades' champion. But they end up developing like a romance, but they have like certain trials that they have to compete in. And I actually really, really enjoyed the trials of this. I really enjoyed the magic of it. But like people were like a bit confused as to who this book was for. Again, like when you don't make the audience really clear, it's a little bit confusing because, like, this did read more like a YA, but then people said that this was actually adult because there is smut in this book. And some people thought it was a little bit awkward because she did sound like she was younger than she actually was. I mean, she was still in, like, her early 20s, which is still young, but it's like, it was written like young adult, but it wasn't. But I absolutely loved it. I gave it just a 4 stars. I didn't think I wanted to give it anything higher than that, but I still really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it because I loved the action and the trials in this book, but that's basically all you need to know. And Zeus holds these trials every year because obviously Zeus is the king of the gods. And he always, like, you know, threatens everybody to dethrone him as the king of the gods. And whoever wins these trials will be the king of the gods. And he's so threatened by Hades at this point that he thinks that he could eventually take over because Hades is the king of the underworld. So, okay, let me just grab my blush and highlight. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about 2 more books before I have to leave. Okay, then next up was actually another book that I returned, and that is My Vampire Plus One by, oh my god, by Jenna Levine. And this is the second book in the My Roommate is a Vampire series, and I read that book in August. So I wasn't sure if I was going to read this book in September or if I was going to save it for October, but then I ended up reading 2 new releases that I was intending on reading in October, and I just read them in September because I ended up finding this book 2 days early at Barnes & Noble. And this one was fun. It was really funny. I definitely felt the chemistry between these 2 characters way more than Primetime Romance, but I didn't love this one as much as I liked the first book, but I still think that this was hilarious, and I definitely thought it was just a fun, fluffy, good time. And it's about this woman named Amelia Collins and Reginald Cleves. And Reginald is actually the best friend of Frederick in My Roommate is a Vampire, so it's about his love story. And basically, you know, Amelia doesn't know that he's a vampire, and they end up developing a romance, and that's basically all you really need to know. And it was just really hysterical, but again, I felt like they took a little bit long to get to the romance, but at the same time, not as long as Primetime Romance. And also, why is this, like, not... Maybe I should use a brush, because I usually use a brush with these sticks. Yeah, that's definitely better. It's just not blending that well. So yeah, it was still really cute. I gave it, I think, a 3.5 because it was just a fun, fluffy time. It wasn't anything, like, too deep. And also, I kind of liked the, like, sinisterness of the first book with the vampires. I thought that was a lot more, like, serious. Well, not, like, serious, but I felt, like, a little bit more concerned for Frederick and his lover. I forgot her name already. But I just thought but this was so funny, too, with, like, the emails that they exchanged together. They're just hysterical. Like, it's just, like, a fun time. So I really liked it still. Okay, then I'm just gonna talk about this super quickly. Let me just show them really quick, and I'll tell you guys my ratings. I'm not gonna go too much into them. I'm just gonna talk about all of them together. And I actually finished a trilogy this month. I was like, I need to finally get into a series because I'm like, I feel like the only way I'm going to find another 5-star is if I get into a series. And I did. And that is the Caraval trilogy by Stephanie Garber. And I read all 3 books this month. So the first book is Caraval. I gave it a 4.25. I gave it a 4.5. The second book is Legendary, and I gave it a 4.25. And then the last book, Finale, I gave it a 5 stars. I absolutely adored this series. This was just so good, and I really wanted to read this in September because originally I was supposed to read Daughter of the Pirate King and Shatter Me, and I didn't end up reading either of them, and I ended up reading this series because I actually posted it as a poll on my Goodreads and I asked people like which series should I read first or like which trilogy, and the majority of people said Caraval. And also, again, a lot of people were putting this series on their September TBR. So, and I felt like I really wanted to read it then. So basically, it's kind of like a prequel series to Once Upon a Broken Heart, but it does have its own story. It's just about the character Jax, which if you guys have read Once Upon a Broken Heart, he is the main character. Okay, I definitely need to use my fingers for this. I don't even know if this is going to show up, though, because, like, when I tried this in the store, it looks, like, really, really dry. This is not even a cream highlighter. It's not doing a damn thing. That is just going back to. I'm just going to use the iconic London highlighter that I got because this is so beautiful. Did I use this yesterday? No, I used it 2 days ago, but I'm going to use it again because it's so gorgeous. So it's about Scarlett and Tella, and basically they are sisters, and they have to go through the games of Caraval, and basically they are run by a ringmaster named Legend. And nobody knows, like, the true identity of Legend. And in the first book, it's basically, like, all the trials of Caraval. The second book is finding out who Legend actually is. And the third book is about whether or not Scarlett and Tella are going to end up with who they are meant to be with. And basically, like, Jax and Dante are more than what... Well, she knows that Jax is more than what she seems, but also Legend is a, kind of immortal. And if you want to love someone, you would have to give up your immortality. Like, you could either have one or the other. So it's like, why be immortal if you can't love? So that was, like, such a crazy concept to me when I first read it. I was like, damn. I was like, would you give up your living forever, or would you give up just loving? And I feel like most people would give up immortality because most people can't live without love. I mean, it's, like, the most important thing, besides our health, is loving someone. So, like, I just loved it, and I just ate up every second of this because I just love the way that Stephanie Garber writes. It's just so magical and whimsical, and I kind of, like, completely immersed myself in this. And now I'm so happy that I've read all of her trilogies at this point, because I read Once Upon a Broken Heart all the way back in March, and I absolutely adored that series. But what's so funny is I always end up liking her first and third books more than her middle books, because I didn't love Legendary as much as I loved Finale and Caraval. And the same thing with Once Upon a Broken Heart. I didn't love The Ballad of Never After as much. A Curse for True Love is a 6-star read for me. I love that book so much. I will die on that hill. That is my absolute favorite book from her. But Finale was fantastic. I loved that book. So yeah, it's basically, the first book is about Scarlett and her romance with, what is his name? What is her brother's name? Basically, she falls in love with Legend's brother. And then the second book is about Tella's romance with Legend. And then you find out who Legend is. And then the third book is basically, whether or not they are going together, who's going to live, who's going to die. And I loved it. I cried quite a bit in Finale. I just loved these books so much. And I'm not going to say any more because that will be a huge spoiler. So unfortunately, I have to go because... yeah, so I think I talked about 11 books. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, only 5 books left. I actually read 1 book in between Legendary and Finale, but I just wanted to talk about all 3 of them at the same time, just so I could talk about my thoughts of all 3 of them at the same time. But I did read 1 book in between that I will talk about when I get back home. So... Um, and I read that on the fall equinox because that book was like perfect to read on the first day of fall. So yeah, we will talk about it later. So bye for now. Okay, so hey there guys. So it's quite a few days after I had filmed my initial wrap-up video. But I'm here to talk about the rest of the books that I read in September. So I think we have like 5-ish books left over to talk about. So this one I actually read before I finished Finale, and that is The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. I did read this on my Kindle because it was only 99 cents to get on Kindle, so I just read it on my Kindle. And then I actually read 3 Kindle reads at the end of September, so I was able to read my Kindle quite a bit at the end of September. So this book is basically like the ultimate fall book. This book was blowing up on TikTok. It's probably the most popular book on TikTok right now, so that's why I was like kind of want to join in on the fun, and I felt like I was getting a little bit of like FOMO when I wasn't reading this, and I actually read this on the start of the fall equinox because I'm like, I need to read this book on the start of the fall equinox. I was trying to finish that book that day, but I didn't. I finished it in like a day and a half though, and basically it's about the 2 characters are Logan and Jeannie, and Jeannie's basically like a new resident that like moves into the town, and Logan thinks she's not going to stick around because most people do that in this town, and basically it's just about like them developing a romance, and Jeannie runs the Pumpkin Spice Cafe, and she ends up realizing that she likes this town way more than she thought she was going to because she wasn't sure if she was going to stick around. But somebody is terrorizing the cafe and they have to find out who it is. And that's basically it. I thought it was really cute. I had a really good time with this one. I thought it was really funny, actually. But there were like a couple of things that Logan did that just irked me a little bit. Like when the 3rd act breakup came along. They didn't really communicate too much at the end, which was a little bit annoying. So I gave this one a 3.75 out of 5 stars. And we'll talk about the second one in a minute because I actually did read that in September as well. So I kind of drifted quite a bit for my TBR the last like week and a half of September because again, I wanted to do a mood read / trying to finish my September TBR, but I did finish quite a few high priority books that were on my September TBR or have been on my TBR for a long time. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. So speaking of books that have been on my TBR for so long, and I finally read this, you guys know I struggle with this author's writing, and that is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I finally read this book, you guys. A lot of people were actually putting this on their September TBR as well. So again, another book that a lot of people were reading in September besides The Wishing Game, Assistant to the Villain, One Dark Window, which I read all the way back in April, The Pumpkin Spice Cafe, and etc. And I actually really, really enjoyed this book. I gave this like a 3.8 out of 4 stars or 3.8 out of 5 stars. I thought that 3.75 was a little bit too low of a rating for this book because I actually really enjoyed it. I thought it was really, really funny. I just had a really good time with it. It was just a fun, fluffy little read. And surprisingly, this was my favorite romance of September. I just thought it was so cute. So we have the characters Olive and Adam. And basically they work in a lab together. And Olive is basically in love with her best friend's boyfriend. But, like, her best friend never knew that. And I feel like the boyfriend kind of knew, but, like, basically Olive, like, she kind of stepped aside for her best friend so her best friend could be happy. Because Olive, like, kind of, is that kind of person that will give up things that will make her happy. And, like, throughout the book, I actually thought Olive was my favorite female character that Ali Hazelwood has written that I've read so far because I honestly really did not like the main character in Check and Mate. I really did not like Bride. So both of those books did not have luck with them in the past. So that's why it's just, I've been struggling to pick up another book from Ali Hazelwood, like pick it up and read it, because I own the rest of these STEM romance books. For some reason, I have to own her books, but I struggle so much to pick them up and actually read them. But this one was on my TBR for my Give Author a Second Chance prompt, and I'm so happy that I was able to draw that prompt, because I was like, I really did want this to be on my TBR for September, and I felt like I could finally push myself to read this one. And I had a feeling I was going to enjoy this, because I feel like with Ali Hazelwood, I don't know, like she writes some really, really funny dialogue. I was giggling in this for most of the time. I thought it was really, really funny between the two main characters. So basically, like, she struggles as a woman in the science industry, because it was very lessons in chemistry vibes to me. I felt like this story was very inspired by that. I haven't read the book, but I have watched the show. And I felt like since I watched the show, I felt like I didn't really need to read the book, because I've watched the show before I was able to read the book. And that's when I wasn't even into reading. But anyway, I thought this was just a really fun time. Some people really don't like this book, though. But for me, out of all of Ali Hazelwood's books that I've read so far, this one's definitely the one that I've enjoyed the most. And basically, they just develop a romance. Adam is actually a lot higher up in the lab. He's one of, like, the main scientists. And, you know, they start, like, fake dating each other, because they actually think that this is going to help their careers in the science industry and in the lab. But, like, you know, there's people that think that she's just doing this to move up, you know, so she can, because Adam, like, is it's very grumpy sunshine with Adam, but it's not done in, like, a super cliche way with her, because he's very sweet to her. He's just, like, grumpy to everybody else, because he, like, takes his, you know, science very seriously. So he's, like, very harsh grading, like, you know, like, the students in his program, because he's like, science is really important, and I don't blame him. So anyway, it was just really cute. I had a really good time with it. Okay, the next up, I read this one on my Kindle as well, because this one was available on Kindle Unlimited. And I mentioned this book just a couple of minutes ago, but I finally read Assistant to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Maher. And this one was my bottom of my TBR prompt. And I'm just so happy I was able to complete, I think I completed 4 out of the 6 prompts. The only ones I didn't get to were Beautiful Cover and, what do you call it? Adventure. Adventure was supposed to be the Daughter of the Pirate King trilogy, but since I read the Caraval trilogy, and also since I didn't get to Shatter Me, the Caraval trilogy was my enemies to lovers prompt, because I originally picked the Shatter Me series for it, but then I ended up reading the Caraval trilogy, and I'm so glad that I read that, because again, so many people were putting that on their TBR. So anyway, and Beautiful Cover, I just used the Games Gods Play for that prompt, because I ended up really enjoying that book too, but I didn't get to the book that I picked for that, because the Games Gods Play was a new release. So I loved this book, you guys. This book was such a fun time. I can't believe I finally was able to read this book. It's been on my TBR for so long, probably since like February of this year. And it was just such a funny concept. So the two main characters' names are Evie and Tristan. And Evie basically needs to find like a job. She needs like employment. She needs money because she needs to take care of her ill father and her younger sister, because they don't really have a mother. She's not really in the picture, but you find out a lot more about her mother as you read this book and as you get into the second book. I actually also just finished the second book as well, because I could not wait to read it. So I actually have, read a series, and I read Assistant to the Villain. So I'm just so proud of myself that I actually finally got to it. And like, Tristan is the villain. and he needs like a staff to like run his villainry, basically. Like he has like offices, and basically there's interns for the villain. There's also like different departments that you can work in, and also like there's different ways that his staff are supposed to like fulfill punishments for like prisoners that he has. It's just freaking hilarious. I had such a good time with this book. I gave it a 4.25 out of 5 stars. It was just so much fun. I realize why this is so popular, because it's just a fun, silly, goofy time. I love Tristan and Evie's banter together. I think they're hysterical. And even though there really isn't any like kissing between them in the whole first book, pretty much, their chemistry and their banter and the like thoughts that go through their head about like how attracted they are to each other. But like Evie doesn't want to like, you know, first off, he's her boss, so it'd be like a little bit weird if she like pursued a romance. But also like, since he's the villain, he's like, I have to like stay the villain. I can't develop like feelings for her. And it's just like the thoughts in their heads are just hysterical. So it's just such a fun, silly, goofy time. And basically they need to fight the King Benedict, because he's like, you know, an awful ruler and all of that. So it's a little bit cliche, but honestly, his story, like really, Tristan's story really reminds me of like a Robin Hood type of story. So I feel like it's kind of just making fun of that. And it was just so much fun. I really had a good time with this book. And like, you know, Evie like describes her first day and everything. Oh my God, I forgot to talk about the book that I read before, Assistant to the Villain. Why do I always do that? I think I was just too excited to talk about this book. I read this book after I read the new release that I read. After Love Hypothesis, I read this book, and then I read Assistant to the Villain. I'm sorry. I think because I just wanted to skip over this book, because I didn't like this book at all. This was so ridiculously disappointing. So the next book that I read after The Love Hypothesis is Nothing Like the Movies by Lynn Painter, and I was able to read this in September because I found this a week early before it came out at my local bookstore. And this was my new release prompt. So I was able to actually read the new release that I said I was going to read in September, because I actually thought that this book was going to come out at the end of September. But then I checked Amazon and I checked Kindle, and they both said October 1st. I don't know why Goodreads says September 25th. But that's basically when my bookstore had it, was literally that day. So I asked them to put it on hold for me because I saw it on their Instagram and I was like, you have Nothing Like the Movies already? And I'm so happy that I asked them to hold it for me because they only had 2 copies. Like the one I put on hold, and they only had 1 out, like to sell. So I was like, thank God. So anyway, unfortunately, this was my least favorite Lynn Painter book that I've ever read. I was thinking that I was going to really like this, because usually I don't agree with most negative reviews, because I'm like, I'm probably going to really like it. I gave it a really fair shot. But honestly, I thought this book was just so long. It dragged on forever. And I felt like there was like zero chemistry between Wes and Liz. Like, honestly, I didn't really love Wes and Liz as much as everybody else does. Like, I'm not a diehard for Better Than the Movies, but I enjoy Lynn Painter's YA books so much. They're such a, like, just a fun time. And honestly, I felt like this book really just took itself way too seriously. I'm like, this is a YA book, and there's no reason to, like, you know, like, Boys of Tommen is a YA series, but the way that she balances the issues that they go through and the comedy throughout the entire series it just works. But I feel like with Lynn Painter's books, like, you want to read them for escapism. And again, there's nothing wrong with like talking about a real issue that you want to put in your books, but there was nothing funny about this book. I didn't laugh really once in this book with Wes and Liz. I just thought that their scenes together in the book, they had zero chemistry. Nothing was really going on with them. The first 200 pages of this book was just based around Wes's interview for baseball. The first 200 pages literally had no romance until like over 300 pages in, and they kissed once. And again, there's nothing wrong with a slow burn, but honestly, I felt like Wes's thoughts about Liz were a little bit creepy. Like, he was like, I am so obsessed with your taste of your lips when we kiss. And he like even said at one point, he's like, I don't want her to think I'm a stalker, but who cares? It's just, I don't know. It was very, very bizarre. And there was one line that I really, really did not like, and this really irked me. So, like, something tragic happens to one of Wes's parents. I'm not going to say which one, so I don't, like, spoil it. So he says to Liz, which we all know that Liz lost her mother in the first book. He was trying to, like, he was sad about, like, you know, the loss of his parent, and he said at one point when they were like frustrated, or he was frustrated with her, because this starts off with them not being together, and everybody was so pissed off about the actual breakup. But when you find out about the reason why they broke up, it is so messed up. And I didn't like that at all about the reason why they broke up, because Wes lies to her about something. And that's why they break up. And it's just so messed up that, like, the whole time I was like, what the fuck? Like, it makes her, like, not really trust him. And also she was, like, questioning her feelings about him. And he kept on, like, basically, like, forcing her to be like, you know, we belong together and blah, blah, blah. And I love you so much. What is there to think about? And I was like, I really didn't like how much he was pushing her to be with him. Like, it was just weird, honestly. And, like, at one point, she's like, let me think about this. I don't know if we should, like, really jump into this right away. And he's like, what is there to think about? I love you. Why do we need to start over? And blah, blah, blah. I don't know. It was just very weird. But he said, like, this one thing that pissed me off. He was like, you don't know how it is to have a dead parent or something like that. Or something along those lines. And I was like, did he forget that she lost her mother? Like, I thought that was so fucked up. I'm sorry, but I gave this book a 2.75 out of 5 stars. I really feel like I'm going to lower my rating to like a 2.5. But honestly, I might even lower it to just a solid 2 stars. Like, honestly, all of the 2-star books that I have read, besides Encyclopedia of Fairies, but even that, I felt more chemistry between the two characters, even though, like, the romance was not really a strong, like, not even really subplot in that book. It wasn't really about the romance. This was just, like, zero romance. And I'm like, this was definitely my least favorite Lynn Painter book. And after I read Betting on You, and I freaking loved that book, I gave that book a 5 stars because that is my favorite YA from her. This just didn't hit. It was just not good. I did not like it. And I had read Happy Never After before that, and I liked that book more. And I'm like, that's one of your adult romances. How come that one was a lot more fun and funny and a better time than this, like, boring, long-ass book? Like, there was no reason why it needed to be that long. So anyway, after I read that, then I read Assistant to the Villain. And then this was the last book that I read in September. And I actually binged this book in a day. And damn, like, I think I didn't go anywhere that day. I think I just wanted to binge this book because this was the last book I was able to fit into the month of September. Because it was literally September 30th. So I binged the second book in the Dream Harbor series. So this is the Cinnamon Bun Bookstore by Laurie Gilmore. And I just wanted to read both of these in September because, again, I felt like I was missing out on the, like, FOMO and everything. And I gave this book, I think I only gave it a 3.5. And basically, this is about Logan's best friend, Hazel, who's in the first book. And this guy Noah, which is also in the first book, which is kind of like one of Logan's best friends as well, and it's their romance that happens in the second book. And basically Hazel runs the Cinnamon Bun bookstore where, she's feeling like her life is like very repetitive though and monotonous, and she feels like she needs like some adventure in her life because, her birthday is coming up and she feels like she needs to just experience these new things. And everybody knows from the first book that... Sorry, I don't know why I'm feeling so out of breath right now. I need to like wrap this up. So everybody knows from the first book that Noah is in love with Hazel. Like everyone pretty much knows that. So Hazel keeps on finding like these clues in her bookstore of like highlighted lines and like dog-eared book pages in the books of like lines of like things that she feels like that she needs to do like in her summer to like enjoy her life, because like she's very closed off and she feels like she just needs to experience new things. So Noah keeps on coming into the bookstore and buying books because, he likes her so much. So everybody's like, he's not really interested in the books. He just comes there to see you, but he actually like has read more books than he's ever read in his life because he just wants Hazel to like him, but also like he ends up really enjoying reading as well. So anyway, he agrees to help her find out who is leaving these clues. And I thought for the whole time it was Noah, but then it turns out to be somebody else. But he agrees to help her like find the clues, and they end up like doing all these things together that are in the books. And they end up, being like dates, and then they end up developing a romance. And that's pretty much it. That's all you really need to know about this one. But I felt like this one fell a little bit flatter for me because I just loved Logan and Jeannie's banter in the first book. I thought it was hysterical. Like, I really like comedy in my romance books, but also like, I feel like if it's not too forced comedy, then I feel like it's just like natural chemistry between the two characters. So that's what I really, really love. This one was not as funny as the first one. And some of the romance parts were a little bit too far-fetched. I'm like, oh, they're in a natural disaster and they're, making love. It was kind of like reminding me too much of like one of those really romantic novels, like with the shirtless guys on the cover. I'm like, okay, like, but I felt like it was making fun of it a little bit, but it was still an enjoyable read. But then after I finished that, I'm like, I feel like I'm falling a little bit into a book slump because I hadn't binged a book like that, like pretty much all month. I like binging books, but I don't know. I felt like I was just a little bit too forced to finish that one, but I also read that on my Kindle because it was only like, I think it was like $3.99 on Kindle, so it really wasn't expensive at all. But anyway, those are all the books that I read in the month of September. I need to stop talking because I'm like, need to do other stuff with my life today. I do have work at 4, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe. Follow me on my Instagram at CBW819 and let me know if you read any of these books and what are you reading in the month of October. I already posted my October TBR and also the last like few books that I talked about from the Pumpkin Spice Cafe all the way to the Cinnamon Bun Bookstore. I vlogged all of that. Excuse me. So I did a mood read and finished my September TBR. So I felt like I still had a really good reading month. I got to books that I was putting off for a while. I read all the new releases I wanted to read. And I read a trilogy. So we had a really good reading month. So yeah, that's it. Bye.